be best for them.
I'm just
kind of to stay the same, or do they want things to change?
I understand, but I'm just kind of interested in how much of a repository that personality is, because presumably there are some voters who see the sizzle in Jacinda and like Jacinda and yet worry about her saying we'll set up a tax working group, which was what Michelle was talking about in the first half of the panel today. So to what extent do people trust personalities even when they like them?
Yeah, so the example you just gave there would be someone that, from marketing speak, has gone to the high elaboration part of the model. So they've actually looked into the policy, and the fact that they're worried about their tax bracket or some other implications on their personal situation means they've looked beyond that personality. But I'm not sure what the exact number of people that would be, but there's certainly another group that don't get beyond that.
I'll give you an example, a hypothesis. If Princess Diana was reincarnated today, she could probably stand for president of any country in the world and win.
Absolutely, yeah, you're right. And, interesting, I guess a rumor or hypothesis coming out of the United States is Mark Zuckerberg might have a crack at it. And, so if you look at him, there's a lot of appealing things that happen, I suppose, right? He's young, clearly a genius, I guess aesthetically pleasing. So he's got all those sorts of things without even thinking about policy. People are already humming and hawing about, this could be a potential presidential candidate.
Yeah, but Stardust wears off. I'm not saying Jacinda Ardern's Stardust has worn off. But, I mean, sooner or later, people look behind a personality, don't they? Be it Mark Zuckerberg or be it Princess Diana,
well,
and they want to know.
They didn't at Trump.
Yeah,
right?
And John Key his personality saw him through, 3 terms. So, it sort of, I guess, let him get away with some things a little bit more, like waters off a duck's back in some cases because of that personality he had.
Yes, well, because in the past, I can probably give this example without feeling I'm betraying anybody, but when we started working with Helen Clark, who was really in a very bad way in terms of polls, horrendous actually, what did we do that was different? Well, we said to Helen, because we noticed that she barked when she was being interviewed. She was very loud when she was being interviewed. She wasn't chatty and colloquial and so on. And so all that happened was we said, you need to be a bit quieter and you need to be a bit more...
Be nice, Helen. Be nice.
Be nice. Well, she is nice. And so it was a very, very simple thing that took about 20 minutes, because... frequently, politicians, like many other people, are not aware of how they come across.
Yes.
They don't know how they come across.
Well, I think most people are like that, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the X factor, for want of a better word, is typically it's likability, isn't it?
Likability, yes.
Likability. Thank you, and Mike Lee, thank you for your would have been an interesting seminar today, and demonstrating with you a great deal about the fact. And I'll just read one quickly. I find it interesting the National Party's campaigning on the lack of transparency around Labour's tax policies when it raised GST and introduced 18 new taxes.
Well, I'm glad you read me that because I don't do social media, so all these poor people who want to remonstrate with me are just going to have to vent their
they rely on
opinions
texting us.
somewhere else.
Michelle Pogue, Brian Edwards on the panel. Thank you both so much today. Here's Checkpoint, John.
Tō te mai rā I hoa mā he kōrero, kei te haere, he kaupapa, kei te karawhiua, kia ora, te reo Māori. Welcome everyone tonight on Checkpoint. National Leader Bill English is live in the studio for an extended interview. Will he be returned as Prime Minister? Why should people vote for him? Have National's attacks on Labour's financials been dark arts or fair cop? And what, if anything, haven't we been told about the party's sole Chinese MP? That at length. Also tonight, Labour leader Jacinda Ardern says Waikato Hospital tried to discharge her 85-year-old grandfather just before midnight last night. And we'll have more on recycled clothing company Savemart. And we ask WorkSafe what they make and what current and former workers are telling us.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batinaho. The National Party leader says his MP, Jian Yang, has never tried to hide the fact he had military training, including intelligence training in China. A story by the Newsroom website focuses on the years Dr. Yang spent at educational institutions run by the People's Liberation Army and the Chinese equivalent of America's National Security Agency. Bill English says the MP has always been open about his background.
It's interesting these allegations have surfaced 10 days before an election when it's been a matter of, that he's been open about, both with the National Party and with government and the Chinese community.
Bill English. Dr. Yang says he's the victim of a racist smear campaign and rejects any allegations that question his loyalty to New Zealand. The Health Minister says he's sure Jacinda Ardern's grandfather would not have been pressured to leave Waikato Hospital late at night, but the DHB says it's sorry and would look into the incident. The Labour leader says she's appalled the Waikato District Health Board tried to discharge the 85-year-old just before midnight. She says the hospital was full and needed his bed. The Health Minister, Jonathan Coleman, says while he doesn't have details, hospitals should be able to have that conversation with patients.
As to whether they feel they're able to go home, but they would never discharge someone who doesn't have the right accommodation or travel in place. They just would not do that.
Jonathan Coleman. The Waikato DHB says the hospital has been full for the past few days and the emergency department overloaded. It says it's sorry that the experience has caused concern for the family. The Green Party says it's in the fight of its life as polls show it hovering just above the number needed to stay in Parliament. RNZ's latest poll of polls has the party on 5.5% compared to 12% in July. The Greens' support has been trending down since its co-leader Matiria Ture stepped down and Jacinda Ardern became the leader of the Labour Party. The Green Party leader James Shaw acknowledges things are difficult.
We are in the fight of our lives right now, and we are as close as we have ever been in the whole time that we have been in Parliament to forming the most environmentally friendly, the most progressive government. So it's a heck of a campaign, and it's really, really close right now.
James Shaw says his party and Labour have ruled out doing any election deals to help the Green Party. The car that plunged into a Christchurch lake, culminating in the death of a couple, has been removed using a crane. Witnesses told police they saw a woman and a man in the Westlake Reserve car park late yesterday afternoon, shortly before the car went into the water. The man was reported to have dived several times to get to the submerged car before failing to resurface. A family friend told RNZ News the pair lived in Christchurch but were from Fiji and had a 6-month-old baby who's been looked after by family. A New Zealand scientist says the public are unaware of the dangers of unchlorinated water. A 50-page report on the contamination of Havelock North's public drinking water says pathogenic microorganisms in drinking water pose the biggest health risk, not chlorine. Dr. Marion Saville says the public need to be made more aware of the real risks they face.
Basically, it's our fault, the scientists. We have not educated the public. We haven't written enough and told the public what are the dangers of drinking water like this.
International Water Association spokesperson Dr. Marion Saville. The report will be presented at a Water New Zealand conference next week. The telecommunications companies Vodafone and Spark say they're very disappointed with the Commerce Commission's latest consumer issues report. The Commission received more than 7,200 complaints. Telecommunications was the most complained about sector, and Vodafone and Spark have been highlighted. Vodafone says the Commission's report is a raw measure only and not all complaints indicated a problem. It says its own benchmarking indicated a 42% drop in consumer complaints. And Spark says the 180 complaints received by the Commission were not necessarily upheld. An Auckland cake maker says there's nothing she can do but cut profits as the price of butter continues to break records. Latest figures show the average cost of a 500-gram block of butter reached a new high of $5.39 in August, $2 more than a year ago. Statistics New Zealand says the 62% annual rise is the largest since 2010. The owner of the caker, Jordan Rondell, says she's now paying almost $200 more a week for butter.
We just get sent emails saying there's a price increase. We can't turn down orders because of that. We can't increases our prices because of that, so we just absorb it ourselves.
Jordan Rondell says she can't source butter cheaper from anywhere else or reduce the amount she's using. It's 5:05. Sport, 2 top cyclists have been forced to withdraw from the New Zealand team for the Road Cycling World Championships in Norway this weekend. Nelson rider George Bennett has been battling glandular fever, which forced him to withdraw from both La Vuelta a España and the Tour de France. Dual Olympian Jamie Nielsen has also had to pull out of the women's time trial competition due to illness suffered during her build-up in Europe. Tonight's must-win netball test against England in Hamilton will mark the Silver Fern captain's Katrina Grant's 100th game in the black uniform. The 30-year-old defender made her debut 9 years ago. Fellow Centurion Maria Tutayer says a series win would be the perfect way to celebrate Grant's milestone.
She's been working extremely hard, especially after Sunday's game, and knowing that she's going to go out there and play the best that she can for her triple digits.
Maria Tutayer says Grant is a great teammate and they've been together for a long time. The game against England gets underway at 7:45. Counties Manukau face a daunting task in attempting to wrest the Ranfurly Shield off Canterbury in Christchurch tonight. Canterbury are undefeated this season, while Counties have won just one of their 4 matches and sit bottom of the Premiership table. They last held the Shield in 2014. That's the news.
Hello, I'm John Campbell. What about this election campaign? Human rights, renters' rights, dirty rivers, dirty politics?
Are you keeping count of the billions of dollars being promised? We are. I'm Guy Espiner.
And I'm Susie Ferguson. Who has to pay and who will have the say? Follow the money on Morning Report.
And counting the votes on the 23rd of September.
And the morning after with me and Catherine Ryan, RNZ National Election 17.
Met service weather to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty in the central high country. A few showers turning to rain this evening, possibly heavy and thundery in the west, easing to patchy drizzle tomorrow morning, but becoming fine in the Bay of Plenty. Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine apart from scattered rain tonight. Whanganui and Manawatu, isolated showers turning to rain for a time this afternoon and evening, cloudy periods tomorrow. Horowhenua to Wellington, fine at first, scattered rain developing this afternoon, clearing by evening, often cloudy tomorrow with a possible shower. Nelson and Marlborough to Southland, high cloud, scattered rain developing this afternoon, rain clearing everywhere apart from Southland and Western Otago tomorrow afternoon. Bulla to Fiordland, rain with some heavy falls, easing for a time overnight, and for the Chatham Islands, occasional showers. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
You are indeed. Thank you, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for being with us. Coming up on the program tonight, Jacinda Ardern on Waikato Hospital and her grandfather, Bill English, at length. A job interview of sorts. And we're back with Savemart workers asking WorkSafe what they make of what current and former workers are telling us about life in the Savemart work area. There were emotional scenes though today, and this is where we're beginning tonight as police divers recovered the bodies of a young Fijian couple from a lake in the Christchurch suburb of Hallsville. The police say the bodies are those of a 31-year-old woman and a 26-year-old man whose car went into the water last night. Maya Burry has been there.
Family and friends of the couple cried and comforted each other as the bodies were brought to the lake's surface in black body bags. One family friend, Surend Chand, told RNZ the pair lived in Christchurch but were from Fiji and had a 6-month-old baby who was being looked after by family. He says he had dinner with the couple just 3 days ago.
They came to visit my place on Sunday, and they were a nice couple, very nice.
Were you quite shocked to hear of what had happened?
Yeah, we are really shocked.
Police were alerted to the car becoming submerged in the lake just before 6 o'clock last night. Hayley Anderson, who lives nearby, says a witness told her the woman was in the car and the man was standing beside it. She says the woman revved the engine before driving over a bank into the lake.
She really deliberately was revving the car and then accelerated up over the bank and into the lake. And after that, the male did actually run in and dove down a few times. but in the end, neither came back up to the surface.
It's being reported the woman was on her learner's licence and was being given a driving lesson. At a briefing at the lake, Superintendent Lane Todd would not confirm if that was true, saying the police were still investigating.
This is obviously a very tragic event for the wider family, who many are gathered here at the moment. What appears to have occurred is at about 20 to 6 last night, a vehicle has driven into the lake, and we're still determining exactly what the causes are. And there has been some speculation as to what's occurred, but it is too early for us to confirm exactly what has occurred.
After the police dive squad recovered the bodies from the lake, a crane arrived to retrieve the couple's car. Lane Todd says the vehicle was found lying on its roof in 6 metres of water.
So as we pull that out, we just have to be obviously careful in terms of how we do that, because obviously the vehicle is part of our investigation as well.
Lane Todd says the police will not release the couple's names until formal identification has been completed. He says victim support staff are assisting the victims' families during this tragic time. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Maya Burry.
Let's turn now to our story from last night about New Zealand's largest clothing recyclers, Savemart. Now, Savemart collects clothing from the blue child cancer bins and the pink recycling bags you leave by your letterbox. The clothing is sold in its stores and an unspecified portion is donated to charity. Last night, workers who sort through those clothes told us hazardous items, including kitchen rubbish, soiled nappies, broken glass, dead animals, and unwashed clothing with faeces and blood on them have been put in the bins. They said they are forced to sort the bins' contents with their bare hands because the company won't provide or allow them to wear gloves. In the past few minutes, we've heard that WorkSafe will be investigating the new Lynn store. We've just spoken to the relevant person at WorkSafe. We'll have more on that in a moment. But first, after our story went to air last night, more Savemart staff members, past and present, have come forward. And pretty great numbers, actually. Bridget Burke has spoken to some of them.
I honestly don't know how it passes health and safety. It's got leaking roof. On a day when it rained, there'll be buckets everywhere filling up with water. The rules and the regulations were just unbelievable. Like, you weren't allowed to bring your bag into work. If you wanted to bring anything like your lunch, it had to be in a clear, see-through plastic bag.
This woman, who asked not to be identified, worked at Savemart's Dunedin store until recently.
The blood-stained pants and shit-stained clothing was nothing unusual. I mean, that was a common thing. That was happening all the time. And sometimes it would get past the girls that would actually be checking the clothes, and then a customer would come in and try on the jeans or whatever it was, and then bring them up to the counter and say, "Have you seen the state of these?" And then you'd look in them, and it was like, oh my God.
The woman, who we'll call Mary, contacted Checkpoint last night after current staff members from Savemart's New Lynn branch raised concerns about their working conditions. Those staff members told us they are not allowed to wear gloves when sorting clothing from the blue child cancer charity bins. They said the contents regularly contain hazardous kitchen rubbish, garden rubbish, soiled nappies, broken glass and broken light bulbs, faeces, blood and other body fluids, and on occasions, rats.
Are you given gloves?
No, we've never been given gloves.
Savemart's owner, Tom Doonan, has refused requests for an interview but told us in a statement yesterday gloves were able to be worn. Mary denies this. She says no gloves were allowed in Dunedin either. She says she considered speaking up about working conditions before she left, but didn't think there was any point.
I actually mentioned union once, and someone said, "Don't mention that word round here. You'll be completely out the door with, in the blink of an eyelid." So no one would even consider joining a union.
Tony, not his real name, worked as a truck driver for Savemart 12 years ago, collecting clothing from the Blue Child Cancer Foundation bins.
You don't really know what's in those bins until you empty it. And then, I have come across faeces now and again, but it's even women's, what do you call them, pads, yeah. And, people just throw all sorts of rubbish in there. And it's supposed to be a clothing bin.
Another former Savemart staffer who worked hanging and pricing clothes told Checkpoint sorters were not allowed to wear gloves. She asked not to be named, but told us she felt staff were treated like thieves.
We had random bag checks and were not even allowed to shop in the main store after the hours we worked. We finished before the store closed. Tom was afraid we had some operation going on to rip him off. Even now, the girls have to come to work with a clear plastic bag holding their property instead of a handbag. This is uncomfortable for everyone, especially the girls who have to catch the bus, having all their personal items on display.
She urged WorkSafe to pay the Newland store a visit.
There was also one of the truck drivers renting the room above our lunchroom that was in no way safe living conditions. One time while we were having our morning tea, his bull mastiff fell through the roof. Very lucky to have missed everyone.
And another woman who worked there as a cutter in her first job 25 years ago, before Doonan's Rags became Savemart, says after listening to Checkpoint last night, she felt compelled to speak out because she didn't think anything had changed.
We worked in what was effectively a massive tin shed. I remember there was just a sheet of iron between me and the outside elements. It was freezing in winter, and the only form of heating we had was a bar heater to try and defrost our hands in order to keep working. This was painful, given how frozen our fingers became. Dust was a terrible problem. I would go home in the evenings and blow my nose, and the tissue would be black with what came out of it. The working conditions at this outfit are terrible, and the pay, absolute minimum.
Mary says heating was only provided at Savemart Dunedin between June and September, and only until 1 p.m.
We'd have hats, scarves and gloves on. It was that cold in there. It was colder inside than it was outside. I mean, sometimes I reckon it was only about 4 or 5 degrees in that shop. It was freezing. And even the customers would complain. But nothing was done about it. So we had to work in freezing conditions, which I think there is a law that a workplace has to be at a certain temperature.
Checkpoint has asked Savemart and the Child Cancer Foundation to disclose the amount it gives and receives from the clothing in the blue bins. The Child Cancer Foundation declined to be interviewed, and Savemart owner Tom Doonan would not give specific numbers, instead referring us to his website, where Savemart says it has been operating for 40 years and has donated $3.5 million to the charity. Mary says that's not good enough.
I actually used to get customers say, "Oh, the money to this goes to charity, doesn't it?" And I go, "Well, actually, no, only a percentage of the profit goes to the Child Cancer Foundation." And they said, "Really? We thought everything went there." That's the impression it gives by the bins, what it says. People think they're donating directly to child cancer, but they're not. They're only getting a percentage of what his profit is. So a lot of people say, "Oh, well, I'm not donating here anymore." I'd say, good on you.
Former truck driver Tony, who worked for Savemart for 5 years, says the best decision he made was to leave.
You know, we've had a saying, I actually started this saying, you know, with Savemart, in between the S and the A, I put a L. Savemart. It was just a saying back then. I wouldn't know what it's like now. It's been 12 years since I've been there, so I don't, you know, once I turned my back on there, I just didn't want nothing to do with it.
For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
Now, Savemart's owner, Tom Doonan, has declined to be interviewed but sent us a statement this afternoon in response to our questions, as he did yesterday too. He says staff wear gloves in most branches. He says bags taken into the workplace are required to be ones provided by the company, and personal bags must be left in lockers. He says no area in the new Lynn building has ever been rented out. He says the heating is very good at the Dunedin store and only turned off when it gets too hot. He says Savemart has only been in operation since 1998. He suggests we compare Savemart to the Salvation Army, Hospice and the Red Cross, which do the same work as Savemart, but mostly with unpaid staff. Now, he did not respond to our question regarding specific details of the donations to charity, including the Child Cancer Foundation, or whether the $3.5 million on the company's website has been donated over 19 years or the 40 years the company has been operating in various forms. So, what do WorkSafe say about all of this? Well, obviously our first story only went to air last night, but they've heard it and are able to respond already in general terms. Jo Pugh is Deputy GM Assessments. I spoke to her just before we came on air and asked her whether if PPEs aren't being used, that's personal protective equipment like gloves, might there be a prima facie case for a breach of the relevant sections under the Health and Safety at Work General Risk and Workplace Management Regulations of 2016.
I would say if you had all the evidence, then I would say definitely there's a breach. Firstly, I'd actually like to remind your listeners that if they ever feel unsafe or asked to do something that they feel is unsafe, then they have that right to stop work. But in general terms, any business in New Zealand has to provide a safe working environment, and they have to take steps that are, reasonably practicable. And that is the right for any business, not just this particular business. So we'd expect all businesses to first, identify those risks, then try and eliminate them, and if that's not practicable, then minimise the risks. So what you're talking about in terms of the provision of PPE or gloves, that's a known control for minimising many different kinds of risks. So if the case is as you've described it, it really seems a no-brainer for the company to supply gloves to minimise what sounds like is a real serious risk to workers.
We've now spoken to a growing number, and it's a pretty significant number of workers on the record and off the record who are telling similar stories. Will WorkSafe look to send in an investigator to try and work out what exactly is going on?
Yes, absolutely. I've already spoken to our team up in Auckland to send an inspector down to have a look at that. We'll get a clearer picture, and then if we are unsatisfied with the procedures, then we'll take the appropriate action.
Joe Pugh, so WorkSafe are sending an inspector in. She also wanted to stress that workplaces like this should have a health and safety representative who can handle such issues. And if they don't, and workers can't make headway with their managers over issues of personal health and safety, people are able to approach WorkSafe in confidence. You can do this online, worksafe.govt.nz/WorkSafe, and look under notifications and forms. You can just Google WorkSafe and you'll find them. 5:21. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. Bill English has arrived in the building and will join us after the headlines. But first, the Labour leader is appalled the Waikato District Health Board tried to discharge her 85-year-old grandfather just before midnight last night. Jacinda Ardern told the story to more than 600 people at a standing room only Grey Power meeting in Nelson today.
My grandfather was in hospital yesterday in Waikato. At 11:30 at night, they tried to discharge him. He lives an hour away from the hospital and he's 85 years old. Now, I do not blame the people working in the system. They are doing a fabulous job. But Waikato Hospital is full. It's full. And that's the kind of choices that the people working in our system are having to make. That is not good enough.
Jacinda Ardern, the Health Minister Jonathan Coleman, was on the campaign trail with National Leader Bill English. When he was asked if he'd been briefed on the case, he said without a name, Waikato Hospital could not identify the individual involved.
But look, the broad principle is the DHB, it's entitled to have a discussion with a patient as to whether they feel they're able to go home, but they would never discharge someone who doesn't have the right accommodation or travel in place. They just would not do that. And look, I think it's a bit sort of edgy, bringing close family into the political debate. I mean, that's something we generally don't do as politicians.
Jacinda Ardern also fired back at National for what she says are lies and scaremongering over Labour's tax plans.
I've seen today a further ad which is full of lies and scaremongering. The New Zealand public deserve better than that. I will run an open, relentlessly positive campaign, but they need to start running an honest one.
Jacinda Ardern, we will of course discuss some of this with Bill English when he joins us in about 10 minutes. This is of course all in the wake of last night's News Hub poll that showed National pulling ahead of Labour in the party vote, with uncertainty over Labour's tax plans being cited as possible reasons. The French President Emmanuel Macron has pledged to rebuild Saint-Martin after the island was devastated by Hurricane Irma. Mr Macron toured the French side of the island today after meeting displaced residents and committing $82 million to the recovery. His visit comes as residents from 3 islands on the Florida Keys were allowed to return home for the first time. Sharon Brett-Kelly has more.
The sun may have been shining on the Florida Keys today, but there was nothing to smile about for residents returning to their homes on Islamorada Key. This aerial footage showing catastrophic devastation. Laura Costello, who moved here just a month ago, walked around trying to find her mobile home amongst the rubble. When she did, she found it lying on its side, its roof ripped open like a tin can.
This is what I expected, unfortunately, after everything I saw on the news.
Islamorada Key is one of just 3 islands where authorities have allowed people to return. It used to be a paradise. But today it resembled a war zone. The aluminium walls of trailer homes torn apart, exposing insulation, bedrooms and kitchens to the sunlight.
Last week everything was perfect. Now we just have some picking up to do and start over again. Gotta remain strong. I'm alive. Praise the Lord.
Orlando Morjohn, a Miami surgeon, spent today cleaning up, hacking away at a giant tree blocking the driveway to his Islamorado home.
I expected, maybe some fence lines to be down. I expected some debris because we knew the direction that with the winds were blowing, they were going to carry debris onto our property. It's happened before. We were not expecting to find somebody else's sailboat, on our backyard, and somebody else's dock with a fishing station on our backyard.
Irma's storm surge washed straight through Pablo Sabata's home like a tsunami. It's completely destroyed.
Well, this is one of the saddest things you see. I mean, this is paradise down here, We love it down here. We really like the Keys, and to see something like this happen, it just takes the winds out of your sails.
Marilyn Ramos said she was trying to stay calm as she cleared sand and seaweed from her Cuban restaurant, Havanos. She's not sure when she'll be able to reopen.
I don't know. We're just trying to be hopeful. I want to say a few weeks. My husband says months, but I don't want to think it's going to, I just can't imagine, So we have our family and friends here helping us out. We're just cleaning out as much as we can, throwing everything out.
The Florida Keys are a popular tourist destination, drawing millions of visitors each year for fishing, diving and boating. Governor Rick Scott warned residents the recovery would take time.
The trailer parks, it's like everybody just tipped everything over. We've been sending the Department of Transportation down the Keys to inspect all the bridges because even though you can see that people are traveling, you're not sure that on the bridges they can take any significant weight.
More than 6 million homes and businesses were still without power in Florida and nearby states, with authorities warning it could be another 10 days before electricity is restored. Meanwhile, reality is hitting the Caribbean islands hardest hit by Irma. On the island of San Martin, where the Red Cross says more than 200 people are still missing, President Emmanuel Macron arrived to survey the damage. 11 people were killed on the French side of the island, while another 4 perished on the Dutch side. Over 90% of buildings have been damaged.
Wow, it was devastating. It was me, my daughter, my sister here, my grandson with me. It wasn't easy. The roof went, the second roof went. We was in the house all the time when the house collapsed on us there. But thank God we're alive.
It was fighting us, and we started to cry out to Jesus, and my sister turned and said, God, just hold up your hand, have mercy. And I started to cry out to Jesus, and I said, God, you see our heart, you see our thoughts, and we start to cry for mercy. God, have mercy, mercy. And God turned and said in my spirit, He's going to ride out this storm with us.
President Macron spent the day meeting those who had lost their homes and businesses. He told those who had been displaced he had brought 10 tonnes of medicine and building materials to the island and pledged $82 million to help with the rebuild.
What I want to do is to have a very fast recovery. So we are trying to fix the situation regarding health, education, access to water, energy and telco.
In Cuba, the aftermath of Irma was also hitting home. The bodies of hundreds of the country's famous pink flamingos lay strewn across the northern beaches, killed by the force of falling trees and branches. For Checkpoint, Sharon Brett Kelly.
Butter is back in vogue, with high demand being blamed for pushing prices to a record high. The price of a 500-gram block of butter has jumped more than 60% since this time last year, adding another $2 to your grocery bill if you are a butter buyer. Tom Furley has more.
Hundreds of cakes are made to order and sold from the Caker on Auckland's K Road each week. Its owner, Jordan Rondell, says on average the shop goes through around 100 blocks of butter to make that happen.
Right now, per week, if it's at 100 blocks a week, we're paying about $540 just for butter, as opposed to back in January when it was $370 a block. That's $370 per week. So it has increased quite a lot. I mean, that's almost $200 a week extra just towards an ingredient that has gone up in price.
Official figures show the price of butter went up over 10% last month alone, pushing the cost of a 500-gram block to $5.39, a record high. At a Countdown supermarket on Dominion Road, the cheapest block was $5.80 on sale, with the rest all above $6. While many shoppers didn't eat butter, I asked local resident Sally whether the increase was something she'd noticed.
No, I just don't even look at the price of butter because it's something I just need. So actually, you've just reminded me I needed some.
After a quick trip back through the aisles, she emerged from the shop rather shocked.
I'm absolutely shattered that in a country where dairy is so important and so prevalent, we have to pay $8, and that's a special for that much butter. It's just crazy.
ASB rural economist Nathan Penny puts the price rise down to skyrocketing demand amid a worldwide shortage.
And essentially, butter's back. What happened a few years ago was some scientists over in the States basically debunked a whole lot of research that linked saturated fats to heart disease. So what they showed was there was basically no relationship, and so effectively the green light was back on for people to put butter and other animal fats back onto their sandwiches, for example.
Nathan Penny says in France, bakers have made the news after having to put up the price of croissants. Back at the caker, Miss Rondell isn't about to change her recipes, so her profits are going to have to take a hit.
There's really nothing that we can do. We just get sent emails saying there's a price increase, so your next bill is going to be higher. We can't turn down orders because of that. We can't, increase our prices because of that. So we just absorb it ourselves and just deal with it, really.
For Miss Rondell and other butter lovers, experts say there's unlikely to be a reprieve anytime soon, with prices expected to continue to set new records in the coming months. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
It's 28 minutes to 6 after the headlines. The National Leader, Bill English, joins us live in the studio for an extended interview. But before all of that, Katrina Batten with the headlines.
The National Party leader says his MP, Jian Yang, has never tried to hide the fact he had military training, including intelligence training in China. Bill English says Dr Yang has always been open about his background. Dr Yang says he's the victim of a racist smear campaign and rejects any allegations that question his loyalty to New Zealand. The Health Minister, Jonathan Coleman, says he's sure Jacinda Ardern's grandfather would not have been pressured to leave Waikato Hospital late at night, but the DHB says it's sorry and will look into the incident. The Labour leader says she's appalled the hospital tried to discharge the 85-year-old just before midnight. She says it was full and needed his bed. The Green Party says it's in the fight of its life as the polls show it hovering just above the number needed to stay in Parliament. RNZ's latest poll of polls has the party on 5.5% compared to 12% in July. The car that plunged into a Christchurch lake, culminating in the death of a couple, has been removed using a crane. Witnesses told police they saw a woman and a man at Westlake Reserve late yesterday afternoon, shortly before the car went into the water. The man was reported to have dived several times to get to the submerged car before failing to resurface. A family friend told RNZ News the couple were originally from Fiji and had a 6-month-old baby who's been looked after by family. An economist says butter is back in fashion around the world, pushing prices to new records. ASB rural economist Nathan Penny says the popularity of butter is surging after scientists debunked research linking animal fats with heart disease. The opera star Dame Kiri Te Kanawa has announced she'll never sing in public again. Dame Kiri says she stopped performing a year ago, but has told the BBC she's now officially retiring. The 73-year-old soprano, whose career spanned more than half a century, says she doesn't want to hear her voice anymore, and it's in the past. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6 o'clock.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. We'd love your feedback tonight. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. You can Facebook us, Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Now, I'm just about to interview Bill English, the National Party leader. You can also watch that on Freeview Channel 50, Sky TV Channel 83, which is, of course, Face TV, and live streaming on Facebook or the RNZ website. He will be sitting beside me in the studio, and there are 3 cameras in here to record that occasion. But before all of that, let's turn to business news now with Giles Beckford, who has leapt into the seat just vacated by Katrina in Wellington. Nice to have you with us, Giles. The company Steel and Tube is looking for a new chief executive, I hear.
They are indeed, John. They've fallen victim, well, perhaps not a victim, but they certainly felt some of the problems and tensions within the building product sector and the construction sector. Dave Taylor has had a rather torrid past year, and he's been heading the company for 8 years, but he'll leave it at the end of next week. The company says he wasn't pushed. We did ask them that explicitly, and they said no. It was a case of mutual agreement. You make of that what you will, of course. But during his time, he certainly helped to reposition the company, but that past 12 months, they've been caught on some big projects. They've had to write down the value of some issues. They've been caught, obviously, in that steel mesh saga that RNZ News unearthed. And they've also had a real squeeze on their margins with project delays and some other issues there, all of which has seen the share price of the company fall by a quarter. Their earnings, their profits were down substantially. And, of course, they've got a date with the Commerce Commission in the courts over the steel mesh issues. So it's been a tough time for Mr. Taylor. I asked the chair, Susan Patterson, what they're looking for in a new leader, and she said, well, we're actually just after leadership. We don't want to change the direction of the company, and in the meantime, they'll find somebody from possibly within the company to just steer the ship while they find a permanent replacement. And from that point of view, of course, the problems that Steel and Tube's had are not necessarily new. They have been, as we've seen, with Fletcher Building, and that led to the departure of Mark Adamson as the chief executive there, and Metro Performance Glass, which makes a lot of the really big industrial glass types. They too have had a few ructions. They had a rather, should we say, heated annual meeting just a couple of weeks ago where their performance was also called into question. So from that point of view, it's a tough sector to be in at the moment.
Giles Beckford, thank you so much, our business editor. What happened on the markets today?
The top 50 index down 13 points, closing at 7827, 72.8 US cents and 90.8 Australian.
Giles Beckford, our business editor, thank you very much. Bill English has just wandered in and is seated beside me. Nice to see you. Thank you for being here. Who's right? The Colmar Brunton poll, TVNZ, that had Labor ahead. The News Hub Read Research poll that had the Nats well out in front last night, or RNZ's poll of polls that has National and Labor neck and neck. I want to talk about that in a sec, but can we start with Jian Yang? And these accusations contained in a newsroom story today. It's pretty sensational reading from the newsroom website. Essentially, Jian Yang studied at an elite Chinese spy school before moving to New Zealand. He has attracted the interest of our Security Intelligence Service, newsroom is saying. The agency he studied under or was with conducts spying activities for China. What has the SIS said to you about this?
Well, I don't comment on, as any Prime Minister does, on the operational security issues. But this is someone who's been open about his background in China. He's now a New Zealand citizen, has been for some time, served in our Parliament as a backbench MP, and appears to have served in a very appropriate manner, certainly built up the connections with the Chinese community, where I understand his background is well known there too. Okay,
so were significant details about where he studied and the people he was studying with withheld from the National Party as he was going through the process of becoming a candidate?
I'm advised not, that he was clear about his CV when he was approved as someone suitable to be a candidate. I became aware of it, you know, probably some time back. He's been in Parliament since 2011.
When did you become aware of it?
Well, some time back. You know, you get to know people.
Right. Who did you become aware of it from?
Well, I can't recall, to be honest. It's just that he had a military background, some connection with intelligence services.
Lots of people have military backgrounds, don't they? And in fact, I mean, there are lots of countries with compulsory military training, aren't there? So there are very many people in parts of the world who have a military background. I guess the interest here is what was his intelligence background. That's a different conversation, isn't it?
Well, and I understand he's been describing that. From my point of view, he has, and I think the point of view of the community he represents, functioned appropriately as a Member of Parliament, and there hasn't been a question about his loyalty to New Zealand as a New Zealand citizen.
Prime Ministers always say this when I ask them about intelligence briefings, that they can't comment, but you can tell me yes or no. Have you been briefed, yes or no, on him by the SIS?
Well, just don't comment. We never start. Never start on that
Yes
stuff.
or no. I promise that will be the final question I ask on whether or not you've been briefed by the SIS. Yes or no.
And I can promise you I'll give the same answer as every other Prime Minister's given.
I'm going to take that as a yes.
Well, I'm giving the same answer as every other Prime Minister's given.
Are you worried about this a week and a half out from the election?
Well, I think it's interesting that it surfaced as you know, a set of assertions 10 days out from an election when it's been well known for 5 or 6 years.
Well known. It's the first I've ever heard of it.
Well,
I'm the host of a formidable current affairs show on 5 nights a week. So first I've ever heard of this stuff, and I suspect lots of our listeners will be thinking, huh?
Well, I wouldn't expect people to be going through the CVs of MPs who've lived in other countries and come to New Zealand. I wouldn't expect they have. But it's something that he was clear about.
Okay. Lots of things popped up out of the woodwork today, including a new ad. National Party website has the ad on it if people want to watch this. You've done a bit of a dad joke with Let's Do This, which is a Labor Party campaign, and you've changed it to Let's Tax This. Gold. But in the attendant material, there's lots of pictures of people who seem to be on the face of it walking into a domestic house, and we're told that they're going to be paying capital gains tax or land tax. There's a guy who he seems to have a wallet in his back pocket, and we're told he's going to be paying more income tax. The accompanying publicity material that I have with me now says Labor wants to stall our economic success through heaping at least 7 new taxes on New Zealand. What are those 7 new taxes?
Well, the list that they've floated themselves, and these are all statements they've made themselves: a tourist tax, the petrol tax, regional petrol tax,
fuel tax,
comprehensive capital gains tax, inheritance tax, which apparently yesterday they ruled out.
So that's
higher income tax,
right?
Water tax.
Okay. Inheritance tax.
These are all out of statements that Labor Party's made.
So the inheritance tax is gone, right?
Well, as of yesterday, apparently.
So can you?
Well, it's not clear just exactly what that means.
Right. We have to take Labor at their word, I guess, don't we? If they say it's gone,
there's an overlap with capital gains tax. Like if your parents pass away and you didn't live in the house, but the house gets sold, as I came across a couple the other day dealing with this, very common experience. It's not just a handful of people. This is very common experience. The question is whether capital gains tax would apply to that house because they hadn't lived in it.
Right.
But that's that's one of the questions. There's many questions.
You said extra income tax.
Yeah. Well,
in the form of what?
Well, the Parliament, with the support of Greens and New Zealand First in July, legislated our family incomes package. So that includes a tax reduction of $1,000 a year for people on the average wage, plus bigger child payments, plus accommodation assistance. Now, Labor would need to legislate,
Bill,
because that will happen on the 1st of April.
That's the English, I shouldn't call you Bill. I'm just incredulous that you were sitting opposite me. So this says heaping at least 7 new taxes on New Zealanders.
Yes.
We've already admitted there's only 6, that because inheritance seems to have gone, prima facie. And this isn't new, is it? It's not extra income tax. It's just that under Labor, their declared policy is that they won't get the tax cuts that they would get if people voted National, right?
Well, no, it's currently the law of the land. It's not a party policy. It's been voted for by the overwhelming majority of Parliament. It will happen on the 1st of April. That's when child poverty in New Zealand will drop by 50,000 kids or 30%. That is the law of the land.
I'm going to ask the most disingenuous question I've ever asked. Do you have an honours degree in English literature?
I do.
Yes, I know. So when you say new taxes, is that a new tax?
Yes, they will have to legislate to increase the rates of income tax because the current rates of income tax on the books have just been lowered by the Parliament, applicable from the 1st of April. Okay. That's absolutely fair.
Yeah. Let's discuss.
I mean, the issue here is you're going into an election. All of the taxes we've listed have been floated by Labor, and they act as if it's not real, as if they don't understand that this is about people's livelihoods, the cash in their pockets, the value of their assets, their ability to get ahead. And we're just asking the questions New Zealanders are asking, and that is, well, if I vote for you, what will actually happen? And they're not able to say so.
And they're reasonable questions. And Jacinda Ardern is doing exactly the same thing that you're doing next Tuesday, and I will ask her those questions, and I look forward to her answering them. Let's look at your own track record on this. Key confirms GST increase being considered. This is February 22nd, 2010. Who was Minister of Finance at the time? That would have been you.
I was, yes.
Yeah, right. Let's go back to, this is the New Zealand Herald I'm reading from, 2008, you were elected. It was the first time Mr Keys confirmed the government is actively considering an increase in GST, a central recommendation of the tax working group set to find new ways to rebalance the system. John Key specifically excluded the possibility of a GST tax increase. You get into government, you have a tax working group, and then it's introduced. In other words, you are now demanding a kind of degree of rigour and high ground transparency from Labor that you simply didn't display yourself when you were in the same position.
Well, John, you're showing a surprising lack of understanding of the history. In 2008, just prior to the election, we had floated a tax package, which was income tax reductions. Then Lehman's collapsed, the world financial system essentially froze up. We cancelled those tax packages because clearly the government was going into deep recession.
There were quite major personal tax cuts in 2010, weren't there?
I'm just outlining the history because the analogy you're drawing is simply wrong. 2008.
I wasn't drawing an analogy, I was just simply stating fact.
No, you were.
No, I wasn't. I was stating fact. John Key said in 2008 there will be no GST increase.
You have to understand the circumstances. We were in a collapse of the financial system, government guarantees on the banks. I remember this, I sat through it. And then we were looking at how to get out of what was then a deep recession. And then in September 2011 we had which was after that, we had the big earthquake, so it was fortunate we'd done something. So in 2010, we set about saying, how are we going to get this economy out of the mire it's in and the government's very large and increasing deficits? And we made the tax mix change. Very transparent process. And when we got to 2011...
Completely contrary, can I get the agreement on this statement of fact, completely contrary to what John Key had promised in 2008, that there would be no GST increase?
Well, the circumstances were completely different. We had a global financial crisis and a country in deep recession, and we needed to get the economy up and moving. And so what we did was a neutral package, distributionally neutral, fiscally neutral. We increased GST and offset it with a decrease in income tax, so people weren't worse off. And then they had the opportunity in the upcoming election to give the verdict on that.
Okay. Let's talk about what's going on with Labor here. I've been thinking about Stephen Joyce's $11.7 billion, and we can read through the list of people who've said, look, that hole doesn't exist. It doesn't exist to that extent. Some people like Cameron Baggery are saying, look, Labor are going to find that they're going to be pretty stretched. No one other than you and Stephen Joyce is saying $11.7 billion. But what he did was throw the cat amongst the pigeons, right? Were you getting feedback from your polling company run by David Farrar that Labor had an Achilles heel around numbers? And did you play to that in a kind of dark arts kind of way? Never mind the truth, let's do the damage. Was that a campaign strategy?
No, and that's a myth. When you go into election campaigns, other parties have to answer all the questions we have to answer every single day. And that is, how do you pay for what you said you would do? And Stephen Joyce's estimate is still the best estimate of what that gap is. I've looked at more budgets than any commentator.
Who else supports him? Who else supports?
Well, I do, and I've looked at more budgets than any commentator. They look at it in an economic sense. If the accountants look at it, you can see what's happened with the Labor numbers and the effect. So what he always said was, it's either that big gap or Labor are going to run budgets for 2 or 3 years where there is no more money for anything other than health and education. Now, that is simply implausible. You can't do that.
There's not an $11.7 billion hole there, is there?
That's still the best estimate. You can argue about it, but the alternative is that Labor are going to run budgets where for 2 or 3 years there's no money for anything outside health and education. So nothing for vulnerable children, nothing for conservation, nothing for police, justice,
Jacinda
defence.
Ardern is going to join us next Tuesday, so I'm going to ask her where she's going to find all that money. And they are very important conversations for her to answer. I want to talk about some of your figures. Tax on water tax. You were at a meeting in Ashburton, 400 farmers, I think, there, right? Mm-hmm. You were very well received indeed, and you're playing this very hard. Feels a little bit like 81, you know, the Nats were working the sort of provincial electorates, Labor are working the urban electorates very, very hard, and there is a sense of a kind of us against them, developing farmers against urban people, but that's a different conversation. You came out with the figure of somebody who would have to pay $50,000 a year in water tax, right?
Look, I can't recall exactly the details of that. Some of the irrigators might, but the main point I was making is it's just a dumb idea if you're trying to achieve environmental outcomes. And part of the divisiveness of this thing is that the Labor Party and others have turned up the Greens as if they have suddenly discovered there's a water quality issue in our rivers. Those communities, which I've represented, and the government have been working intensively for 5, 6, 7 years on this stuff, developing the national measurement system, creating the collaborative processes.
Are you telling me you're proud of the management of freshwater in New Zealand under your government?
Yeah, because we've got on with the job. We've created...
Really?
Yes.
You think Nick Smith's done a good job? You think the government's done all it can to protect our waterways, our rivers, our lakes and our fresh water?
Okay, well, I'll just give you an example. There was no agreed science on measuring water quality. We have been through an intensive collaborative process through the Land and Water Forum and also with regional councils to develop that, and it is now settled. We now have a system for measuring E. coli, nitrates and phosphorus across the country. And now we can monitor progress. Now, you might think that's easy. It was actually very difficult to get the science.
It certainly took into your third term to do it, right?
Well, because we had to start with the iwi conversations. We had to assemble the Land and Water Forum, which started actually quite early on. And the other thing that irritates that crowd in Ashburton is they've spent years at meetings developing the processes for changing farm management, dealing with the nutrient allocations, intensive, difficult work. And then these people who have shown no understanding or empathy for that work turn up and say, if you are going to quarrel with us over the water tax, we'll double it. The water tax misses most of the target.
Okay, let's talk about the figures. I just want to get some rigour around the figures. So $50,000 a year is the sort of top level of what a farmer might have to pay, right?
Yep.
Now, that is equivalent. Anusha Bradley did a fascinating report for Morning Report this morning. Agricultural economist Peter Fraser, former Treasury economist, I don't know if you work with him, he calculated that as the same amount of water as would be used by 31,250 people in their homes. Is anyone really saying farmers shouldn't have to pay a small amount for the use of that water?
Look, the core argument here is that the tax is an indiscriminate way of raising revenue, which is then going to go off to a bunch of bureaucrats who will distribute it. If you're seriously interested in raising the quality of water in our waterways, that is not the instrument you use.
What do you do?
You do what's going on now, and you would do well to go and see the work that's happening in the Waikato, in the Manawatu, in Canterbury, in Southland, to deal with these issues. Millions are being invested by our rural communities. And you know what one day, John? One day it's going to come to town, because E. coli levels are twice as high in urban waterways as they are in rural areas, and that is going to be a much bigger task to fix.
That's a very hard task to fix, but it's also hard to sheep blame, isn't it? I mean, no one's letting animals wander around in great numbers shit in urban areas, are they? I mean, when my dog, bless him, when little Cosmo does a poo, I pick it up in a plastic bag when I take him for a walk through Greyland Park, right? So I don't know that they're the same conversations, are they?
Well, they are. The water quality is the water quality, and this isn't about blame. This is about working with the people who actually make the decisions. Because you know who makes the decisions about what happens in the Ashburton River, or the Oriti River, or the Manawatu River? It's the farm worker opening the gate at 5 o'clock in the morning. It's the farmer's family who've owned that place for a long time. It's the people in the small towns who are trying to deal with the wastewater that comes out of the small town into the river. We work with them. And the water tax is a blunt, indiscriminate instrument which doesn't address those problems and has been pushed at them as a punitive tax, not as a way of punishing them for what they do, rather than working with them on the very real progress we're making.
We've got 7 minutes left. It's a bummer. Time flies when you're having fun. I wish we had more time. But do you enjoy this as you're sitting here opposite me campaigning? You went into Parliament in 1990. 1990. Do you think, oh God, I can't be buggered with this? Or actually, does it still really matter to you?
Well, what does it sound like? It really matters, because you've raised the water issue about water. We have the opportunity in New Zealand to get the smart solution, which is to keep remaining the producer of high quality food for the world and raising.
After 9 years, can you still sell that as a future tense prospect?
Absolutely, because this is a long-term job. You know, politics doesn't, the issues aren't in 3-year cycles. Changing the quality of our water, even all the other political parties actually are all saying roughly 20 to 30 years. Some call it a generation, some call it 20 or 30 years. It's like pest-free New Zealand. That's 30 years, but we're getting on with it. And I am highly motivated about these things because that's a key strategic issue for New Zealand.
Can we address butter? It's not a key strategic issue for New Zealand, but it is a very expensive household item now. It's at record high prices. In other words, actually at the front end, at the revenue end, the market rules, right? Sorry, we've run out of water. Can we get some more water delivered into the studio? Is that all right? Sorry for Mr. English. We should have had a jug or something.
That's right. I get through a lot of water.
It's a very poor. We can't afford it. Joke. Weak dad joke. So at the market end, right, we are not spared the consequences. At the revenue end, we pay what butter costs. Mm-hmm. Are farmers unworldly to keep insisting that they are spared the costs of water at the production end?
Well, they're not spared the costs of water. I mean, right? If you take down in Canterbury, or was yesterday, that what they're doing is trying to shift from aquifer water, which is draining the aquifers and creating intensity of nitrates, particularly in the shallow levels of the soil, and swapping over to storing alpine winter water. So when it's plenty of it, you store it and then you use it. That is a much more sophisticated approach than what I'm hearing in the political debate. I mean, these people are spending millions doing it now.
Jacinda Ardern's grandfather turned away from, well, actually discharged from Waikato Hospital. Thank you very much. This is at 11:30 at night. Thank you.
I think we just need to check, because I'm still unsure whether he was actually discharged or not.
Okay.
I can only go on them. Well, the public reports don't have him discharged.
Can we talk about social indicators like youth suicide, which is just terrible, isn't it? And imprisonment. And I know you're too decent a man to deny this. You're not proud of our prison population. You're not proud of our youth suicide rate. You're not proud of our prison population. There is somewhere in this country now a sense of something having been lost amongst some people, and that is hope. Hope of participation, hope of something decent in life, hope of a crime-free life, hope of home ownership, hope of getting by, hope of holidays. What do you say to those people?
Well, everyone has aspirations, and they all have their dreams for how they can be and how their life can be. And our job is to enable the best opportunity for that to occur. And in each of the cases that you've mentioned, those opportunities are growing. And there's many you haven't mentioned where they have grown. Like, say, tomorrow morning, 50,000 fewer children will wake up in a benefit-dependent household than 6 years ago. The number of kids who are going through our youth courts you could only describe as plummeted. It's dropped by 50 or 60%. I went out to Vanguard School today, a partnership school, which apparently a Labor government would close if they became the government. 150, 200 kids there, full of hope and aspiration, because they've been given an alternative.
I heard about
so
that.
We're always looking for the way that we can enable that. And actually, we've got the toolkit now through social investment to get right into if it's particular groups of offenders, particular groups of young people vulnerable to suicide, to be able to deliver the support where it will make a difference.
Because I went out to a school in South Auckland last week, right, which was Finlayson Park Primary School in Manurewa, under the formidable management of Shirley Mahi. It's New Zealand's largest primary school. Can we end on this tonight? Because we've only got 2 and a bit minutes left. She told me about kids who have cups of tea for dinner. She told me about the fact that accommodation costs so much that working parents are struggling to feed their children. What is the message of hope from you as National Party leader for those families if you are re-elected?
That on the 1st of April, which I know might seem a wee way away right now, those families who are most pressed by high rents and low income will be anything 60, 80 through to $150 a week better off, because we recognise an underlying problem, a pretty basic, I know it sounds boring detail, but accommodation supplement in West and South Auckland hasn't been adjusted since 2006. Now we're doing it, we're adjusting it, and that's going to be a big shift. That is the primary driver of reducing the number of kids under the international poverty line by 50%. Then we have the opportunity on the back of a growing economy to do it again in another 2 or 3 years. That's the kind of success we could have over the next few years if we keep the economy moving and stay on track.
How many people in poverty, how many children living in poverty do you think? What's the number? So the Child Poverty Monitor, right, they use two figures. One is material hardship, which is I think at about 155,000 children. One is income hardship, which is about 295,000. What's the figure you use?
Well, there's a whole lot of measures. We publish a book full of measures every year.
How many?
The one I'm referring to is just one out of the measures.
Yeah.
The OECD number of households below 50% of the median income.
Yeah.
There's around 150,000 of those kids.
Yeah.
They'll drop by 50,000 on the 1st of April. That's on the books now. And then we get to go further in the next few years. Alongside that, we also have to address the other aspects of deprivation and poverty, and that's what social investment's all about.
Bill English, thank you for coming in. I'm sorry about the water situation. We really appreciate your time in the studio this evening. Bill English, leader of the National Party.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jacinda Ardern will be doing the same thing next Tuesday, and I will ask her some of the questions that you were raising about what they can afford. Bill English joining us live in the Checkpoint studio here in Auckland with insufficient water. It's 6 o'clock on RNZ.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. The National MP Jian Yang has confirmed he has taught spies in China but denies that he's a spy himself. A story by the Newsroom website raises questions about the two-term MP's involvement with Chinese military and intelligence. It focuses on the years Dr. Yang spent at educational institutions run by the People's Liberation Army and the Chinese equivalent of America's National Security Agency. Dr. Yang says he was once a member of the Chinese Communist Party and a civilian officer in the Chinese army, but he was never a spy himself. He says he only taught them English.
They were monitoring communications, right? Okay, so therefore they need English language to understand. So my job is teach them the language. I was trained to learn language, and then after that I stayed as a lecturer to teach them English language.
Jian Yang. The National Party leader, Bill English, says Dr. Yang has never tried to hide the fact he had military training, including intelligence training in China. The National leader, Bill English, says his party is not carrying out a smear campaign on the Labour Party's tax plans, merely asking the questions the public need answers to. The Labour leader, Jacinda Ardern, says she's doing her best to counter National's attacks on tax, as the two parties are neck and neck in the polls just 10 days out from the election. National has been running a strong line against Labour's water tax and planned to set up a tax working group. Bill English says the questioning of Labour's water tax and its tax working group is important for everyday New Zealanders.
It's getting in at the question New Zealanders are asking. What are Labour's intentions on tax? And what surprises me is the Labour Party don't seem to think it matters, but actually this is about the cash in people's pockets.
Bill English says the Labour Party is spreading uncertainty. The Green Party says it's in the fight of its life as the polls show it's hovering just above the number needed to stay in Parliament. RNZ's latest poll of polls has the party on 5.5% compared to 12% in July. The Green support has been trending down since its co-leader Matiria Ture stepped down and Jacinda Ardern became the leader of the Labour Party. The Green Party leader, James Shaw, acknowledges things are difficult, but he says the party is also close to being part of a government for the first time. He says every single vote for the Green Party adds to Labour's total and increases the chances of a change of government. Both parties have ruled out making any electorate deals. The Education Minister says the government has committed around $20 million to ease the Auckland teacher crisis since August last year. 4 principal and teacher groups today released a plan they want the incoming government to implement to keep more teachers in Auckland. Sally Murphy reports.
Plan includes paying teachers more, wiping student loans and prioritising children with learning and behavioural needs. The Education Minister, Nikki Kay, says she has listened to what principals have been telling her about the shortage, and that's why new initiatives have been put in place. She says work is underway to develop a long-term workforce strategy. Labour's education spokesman Chris Hipkins says he's willing to meet with the groups. He says most of the points are already addressed in Labour's policies. This is Sally Murphy.
The United States Supreme Court has allowed President Donald Trump to broadly implement a ban on refugees entering the country. An earlier ruling by a lower court partially overturned the controversial refugee ban, but a Supreme Court decision today has ruled in favour of the Trump administration. Our correspondent Harry Horton reports from Washington.
Donald Trump's executive order seeks to block all refugees from entering the country for 120 days. The White House says it's needed to prevent terror attacks while strict vetting procedures are implemented. A lower court had ruled that some refugees could enter if they had a formal offer. But the Supreme Court sided with the Trump administration and has now overturned that decision. Human rights groups say the refugee ban is inherently cruel. A key hearing in October will determine whether Donald Trump's refugee policy complies with the US Constitution. Harry Horton, RNZ News, Washington.
The New Zealand opera star Dame Kiri Tekanawa has announced she will never sing in public again. Dame Kiri says she stopped performing a year ago, but has told the BBC she's now officially retiring. The 73-year-old soprano, whose career has spanned more than half a century, says she doesn't want to hear her voice anymore, and it's in the past. It's 6:05. Sport, and the Nelson cyclist George Bennett and women's time triallist Jamie Nelson have both been forced to withdraw from Road Cycling World Championships in Norway this weekend. Dual Olympian Nielsen has pulled out of the women's time trial due to illness she picked up during her European build-up. Bennett has been battling glandular fever, which forced him out of La Vuelta a España and the Tour de France. He was scheduled to race the individual time trial alongside rowing star turned cyclist Hamish Bond. The Silver Ferns must win their game tonight against England and Hamilton if they're to take the 3-test series and retain the Tiny Jameson Trophy. The game will be 30-year-old captain Katrina Grant's 100th, becoming just the 7th netballer to have played 100 games for New Zealand. Western Australian mining tycoon Andrew Forrest says that his proposed breakaway rugby competition will launch after the Super Rugby finishes next year and feature 6 Asia-Pacific teams, including the ex-Western Force. Meanwhile, the former Wallaby prop Ben Daly has become the first player to leave the Western Force since they were cut from Super Rugby. Daly has signed a new 2-year deal with the Melbourne Rebels. The Los Angeles Lakers plan to retire the jersey numbers of their former star player Kobe Bryant later this year. Bryant wore number 8 before switching to number 24 during his 2-decade career with the Lakers, where he won 5 NBA titles. That's the news.
What is women's work in 2017? Have women left domestic servitude behind?
Women are in almost everything these days to a small extent.
And is their work paid fairly?
There's between $5 and $7 an hour difference in the pay.
I'm Megan Whelan, and this week's Insight investigates if women's work still exists and the gender pay gap, just after the 8 o'clock news on Sunday morning with Wallace Chapman on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. A few showers turning to rain this evening, possibly heavy and thundery in the west, easing to patchy drizzle tomorrow morning, but becoming fine in the Bay of Plenty. Gisborne to Wairarapa fine apart from scattered rain tonight. Whanganui and Manawatu, isolated showers turning to rain for a time, and this afternoon and evening, cloudy periods tomorrow. Horowhenua to Wellington, fine at first. Scattered rain developing this afternoon, clearing by evening. Often cloudy tomorrow with a possible shower. Nelson and Marlborough to Southland, high cloud, scattered rain developing this afternoon. Rain clearing everywhere apart from Southland and Western Otago tomorrow afternoon. Bulletu Fiordland, rain with some heavy falls, easing for a time overnight, and for the Chatham Islands, occasional showers. It's coming up to 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. The National Party's sole Chinese MP, Jian Yang, says he's the victim of a racist smear campaign. There have been media reports questioning the MP's involvement with Chinese military and intelligence. The focus on the years Dr. Yang spent at educational institutes run by the People's Liberation Army and the Chinese equivalent of America's National Security Agency, the NSA. Dr. Yang, elected to Parliament as a List MP in 2011, spoke to reporters in Auckland a short time ago. He confirmed that he has taught spies in China, but denies he's a spy himself.
I have been nothing but upfront and transparent about my education and employment. Although I was not born here, I'm proud to call myself a New Zealander, obey our laws, and contribute to this country. I challenge those who are propagating these defamatory statements to front up and prove it. This is a smear campaign by nameless people who are out to damage me and the National Party 10 days from an election, just because I am Chinese.
So just to be absolutely clear, Are you a spy? Have you ever been a spy?
No.
Have you had any intelligence training?
No.
Have you ever held any rank or been part of the Chinese army?
I was a civilian officer, paid by the military, but I had no ranks. I was a lecturer.
Jian Yang speaking in Auckland late this afternoon. National leader Bill English says the MP has never tried to hide the fact he'd military training, including intelligence training in China. Mr English says he's always been open with the National Party, the government and the Chinese community about his background. It's coming up to 10 minutes past 6. The Green Party is currently in the fight of its life, really. Its polls, as polls show it, hovering just above the number needed to stay in Parliament. Remember, the threshold under MMP is 5% unless you win an electorate seat. In RNZ's poll of polls, the party has been trending down since late July, around the time Metiria Ture stood down from the co-leadership and Jacinda Ardern took over the helm of Labour. Looking at what the Greens are doing in response to all this, here's our political reporter, May Heron.
A News Hub poll last night had the Green Party on 4.9%, just under the threshold necessary to make it into Parliament without having an electorate seat. After a tumultuous period in early August, when two senior MPs rebelled against the leadership and Metiria Ture stood down after her benefit fraud revelations, the Greens knew they would take a hit in the polls. However, the party had hoped to be back on the up heading into the election. The party leader, James Shaw, acknowledges things are difficult, but is putting a positive spin on the situation.
We are in the fight of our lives right now, and we are as close as we have ever been in the whole time that we have been in Parliament to forming the most environmentally friendly, the most progressive government. So it's a heck of a campaign, and it's really, really close right now.
With RNZ's polling averages putting the Greens at 5.5%, James Shaw is confident his party will make it back to Parliament after the election.
We've got a really strong base, and we know that as voters get closer to the election, they're looking at it and saying actually there is a real mood for change, and if they want change, then clearly they should give their party vote to the Green Party, because we're the only viable option in terms of being able to provide Labour with a coalition partner.
At Otago University today, the Green Party unveiled a package which would raise student allowances by 20% and make them available to everyone. A few students there wondered whether a vote for the Green Party took away a vote for Labour. During a question and answer session, James Shaw had this response.
Every single vote for the Green Party adds to Labour's total and increases the chances of a change of government. And I know some people have been kind of thinking, I need to give my vote to the Labour Party directly. Actually, having the Green Party in there is necessary for Labour to be able to form a government.
Mr Shaw directed students to a polling booth around the corner, which convinced some to go ahead and give the Greens their party vote.
It was a way out. We did just vote just then, straight after we heard them.
He did say that a vote for Green is technically also a vote for Labour, and I think that's one thing that people have to kind of consider.
It was a bit of drama a while ago, but it's been good. I think they're slowly starting to come back. James Shaw's doing really well.
Everything the Greens have done have made me support them more. So for me it's not a teetering issue, and it makes me want to vote more for them.
Labour leader Jacinda Ardern says she and James Shaw have both ruled out doing any election deals to help the Greens stay in Parliament.
Whilst we share values and a desire to change the government, we've each said we'd also run our own campaigns.
So will you give them any more support at all?
Oh, look, from what I've seen in other polls, there's a lot of movement, and I just don't accept that will be the final result for the Greens.
Another party that has dropped in RNZ's poll of polls is New Zealand First, which is currently sitting at 7.5%, down from 13% at the start of August. New Zealand First leader Winston Peters says the party is actually going very well and likened political polls to voodoo.
I think your polls are crap, and I've always thought that.
But the polls show that
Labour and
See, you're back.
Nationals
You're back to saying what you should say is, Mr. Peters, my crap polls should be listened to, and my answer is no. Your crap polls should be totally ignored by the public because they are rubbish.
Rubbish or not, nearly 90,000 people have already cast their votes in the first 2 days of advance voting. The Electoral Commission estimates nearly 50% will head to a polling station before Election Day, which means on election night, the first results could be more telling than ever before. For Checkpoint, May Heron.
Wipe student loans, pay teachers more and put public sector workers at the top of affordable housing lists. They're part of a 10-point plan unveiled by primary principals to fix Auckland's teacher crisis. The country's largest city is facing its worst teacher shortage in 20 years, with schools struggling to fill vacant positions. The plan, released by 4 primary principals groups, is aimed at the next government, but no one knows how much it will cost. Sally Murphy was at the launch.
It was a carefree playtime for these children at Fruitvale Primary School in New Lynn this morning, but in the staff room it was a different story. Kevin Bush, the president of the Auckland Primary Principals Association, paints a gloomy picture of the situation.
We are in the depths of a staffing crisis in our schools, in our Auckland schools. We have a shortage right across the region. It's not particular to any one area, and we've got schools where there are 3 classes with 2 teachers and a teacher aide having to cover for the 3rd teacher. So it's not a satisfactory situation at all.
Mr Bush says people simply can't afford to live in Auckland, let alone buy a house there on a teacher's salary. And the 10-point plan could help make it more appealing for teachers to stay. It includes reducing class sizes in low decile schools, increasing teachers' pay, and investigating whether affordable housing can be prioritised for key public sector employees. It's also calling for student loans to be wiped for teachers who commit to working in Auckland for 3 years, which could also grow to other areas suffering teacher shortages like Queenstown and Tauranga. The former president of the Waitakere Area Principals Association, Martin Wetherall, says the plan also has 5 priorities to increase resources for children with learning and behavioural difficulties.
Learning support, mental health issues, mental health conditions, it's huge. And I do strongly believe that that's impacting on teacher supply, particularly the decrease in the number of people training to be teachers. They simply look at what's happening in the classroom, and banking, law, architecture starts to look pretty shiny at that point.
Mr Wetherall says the fact that a third of teachers are expected to retire over the next 15 years is likely to exacerbate the problem.
In Auckland, we're struggling to recruit, we're struggling to retain teachers. The trickle of economic refugees leaving Auckland is becoming a flood. Act now, or your child or your grandchild will not have a teacher.
21-year-old Liam Kelly, who is in his first year of teaching, is exactly the type of person they're trying to keep.
I've always wanted to be a teacher. I think the impact that teaching has on children and the beauty that you see through their successes is such a powerful thing.
Liam Kelly earns $47,000 a year before tax and has a student loan debt of about $24,000. He says he's happy in Auckland right now, but is keeping his options open.
Obviously, the price of living, the rural lifestyle, there is quite a high cost to living in Auckland, and paying off the student loan is obviously a big want, so I've got to get that done quickly so that it's not burdening me in the future.
Do you think in the long run, though, you'll be able to be a teacher and afford a house in Auckland?
That's a tough question, I think. I think you have to really pinch your pennies and really save up, and you really have to get onto the housing market and play it smart, but I think it'll be quite a tough grind to get my own house in Auckland.
The group says they have no idea what the plan would cost to implement, and that would be up to the Ministry of Education. They want the incoming government to adopt and implement the plan in its first 100 days. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Sally Murphy.
Nationals Education spokesperson Nikki Kay says she's talked to principals about their concerns, and her government has already committed $20 million on initiatives to address teacher supply issues. Labor spokesperson Chris Hipkins says he's happy to meet with the groups to go over the plan, but says most are already addressed in his party's policies. 18 minutes past 6, you're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Wellington commuters could end up paying an extra $450 a year to bus to work compared to going the same distance by train if proposed fare changes go ahead. The Greater Wellington Regional Council is proposing a 3% average fare increase, offset by discounts for off-peak trips, full-time tertiary students, children and people with disabilities. These will come into effect in July next year when new operators take over and new buses hit the road. However, monthly bus passes will also disappear in the process, pushing up the price for many commuters. Our local government reporter Michael Kropp has the story.
Wellingtonians currently pay the highest fees for public transport on a per kilometre basis, and they know it.
It's expensive. I live in Wilton, which is a long way away. You know, I catch a bus from here and it takes 25 minutes. Yeah, it is really expensive for someone like me on a low income.
People make sort of a huge deal about it. But I mean, you can get from, say, the university to the basin for like $2.50. That's pretty good. People need to walk more. I don't know, but I guess you can compare it to Australia, where their bus fares are half the price, and I think that's what upsets most people.
I think sometimes it's quite expensive because sometimes, like, if I don't use the Snapper card and then I have to pay maybe $5 for 15 minutes off bus.
For those living outside Wellington, Snapper is the name on the bus cards. Analysis from 2013 shows that under the current fare structure, Wellingtonians pay up to 180 cents per kilometre compared to 10 to 40 cents in other cities. And now the Regional Council is proposing fare increases. Sarah Fries, the Wellington City Councillor responsible for public transport, cycling and walking. She says there's a lot of good stuff in the proposal, particularly the free bus transfers and the new discounts. However, she says it's unaffordable for many commuters.
One of our most recent surveys showed that 33% of people felt that fares were unaffordable, and of that 11% actually felt that they were very unaffordable. So bus fares are regularly flagged as a reason why people don't take the bus.
Mrs Fries says scrapping the unlimited travel monthly bus passes exacerbates the unfair cost difference between buses and trains, which can get a 25% discount.
Now, when I went to a recent meeting, a resident there from the eastern suburbs actually raised that if she loses her monthly bus pass, which currently costs her $150 a month, and there's no replacement and she has to use Snapper, it's actually going to cost her at least $500 more a year than a train user travelling the same distance.
But Barbara Donaldson, the chair of the Regional Council's Sustainable Transport Committee, says the monthly bus pass was offered by the current operator, NZ Bus, not the council, so it cannot be retained from next year, and not many people used it anyway. However, she says stories such as those are the whole point of consulting.
That sounds really unfortunate, and obviously the whole reason that we're having asked for submissions is so that we can look at these things again.
Ms Donaldson says commuter fares probably can't go any lower.
55 to 60% of our operating costs have to be met by our fares, otherwise we don't get the New Zealand Transport Agency subsidies.
Submissions on the proposed fare changes must be in by Monday. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Michael Kropp tēnei.
It's been 45 years since the Maori language petition was presented to Parliament, calling on the government to introduce te reo Maori in schools. The activist group Ngā Tamatoa led the movement, and a former member says the country still has a long way to go to make te reo part of children's education. Te Mana Korehi reporter Te Anua Huri Hanganui takes a look back at where it all started.
The most essential thing that we're trying to achieve is to make the public aware that the Maori language is not dead and has no real hope of dying. It's a language that's really part of everyone's everyday life.
A young David Broughton, now known to many as Kiwi actor Rawiri Paratene, spoke on the steps of Parliament in 1972 on behalf of Ngā Tamatoa.
Ko mai o mātou tātou reo, ko mai o mātou tikanga tanga.
Ngā Tamatoa members and the Reo Māori Society presented 30,000 signatures to push te reo Māori in the school curriculum. It was also the catalyst for Māori Language Day, which eventually grew into Māori Language Week. Ngā Tamatoa member Toro Waka remembers the struggle 45 years ago.
There was a lot of anti-Maori sentiment for causing problems between them and their European friends. It wasn't an easy thing trying to break the mould of institutional racism, I suppose, as well.
Tora Waka says the development of Kura Kaupapa and Kohanga Reo and other organisations promoting te reo is a testament to those years of struggle. But he says te reo should be compulsory in schools and children need to be taught a lot more about the Treaty of Waitangi. Ministry of Education figures show that last year 1,000 mainstream schools offered te reo in their curriculum, up 43 from 2015. Mr Waka says that is still not good enough.
There are some positive signs that, that there's a mind shift out there in some quarters, but at the same time they would recognise that very little has changed, I suppose.
Another member of Ngā Tamatoa, Tami Iti, agrees.
It could be better, but at least that te reo now, where you've got TV, te reo Māori week, but te reo Māori week should be every day of it, not just for 1 week.
A symposium at Victoria University has been discussing what exactly has been achieved in Aotearoa since the petition. Rangatahi from Te Kura Kaupapa Māori or Kawakawa Mai Tapiti in Hicks Bay say they are indebted to their kaumātua who fought for te reo 45 years ago.
What they did with the petition and stuff has really revitalised our language, and yeah, we've come a long way. But I think the main goal for our tūpuna was to have te reo Māori stretched widely throughout Aotearoa.
Organiser of the symposium and te reo Māori lecturer at Victoria University, Vinnie Alden-Reader, says the conversation about te reo needs to change.
We need to stop talking about te reo as being a dying language. Yes, we've got work to do, but also we're in this amazing space now where we've got resource, we've got people, we've got all of this stuff in behind us to help us really make a good go of it.
A hikoi to remember the Māori language petition will be held in Wellington tomorrow, starting at Victoria University and ending on the steps of Parliament. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko te aniwa hurihanga nui aho.
10 years since the very first iPhone, Apple has rolled out its much-anticipated iPhone X. Billed by Chief Executive Tim Cook as the biggest leap forward since the original iPhone, although I guess he would say stuff like that. There were few surprises at the launch as there had been so many leaked details about the new device, but its price tag still raised eyebrows. Must be to offset the cost of doing business in New Zealand. Here's the BBC's tech reporter, Rory Kathleen Jones.
It's the world's most valuable company, and its vast new headquarters speaks of its ambitions to grow even richer. And in the Steve Jobs Theatre, named after its founder, Apple unveiled the latest versions of the device which has made it so wealthy.
We have huge iPhone news for you today.
2 iPhone 8 models will look like modest upgrades to all but dedicated Apple fans. But a decade after the first version, it's the iPhone 10, which is meant to showcase how far the device has come. The standout feature is face recognition technology, allowing you to unlock the phone with just a glance. But it's the fact that it starts at an eye-watering $999, or the same in pounds, which may stand out for those wondering whether to upgrade. Apple is rarely first with new technology. Face recognition, for example, is already available on this Samsung phone, but its reputation for quality and the loyalty of its fans means that more than 1 billion iPhones have already been sold. Now, though, with customers showing a bit of a reluctance to upgrade quite so frequently, retailers need these new models to be huge hits. But one technology investor says building on its success gets ever harder for Apple.
Apple has become the master of sort of psychologically instilling need and desire in people to buy new phones because, unlike other manufacturers, their prices keep going higher and higher and higher. So not only are you trying to convince consumers to change or upgrade their phone, you're actually trying to convince them to spend even more than they did the time before.
What's exciting software developers is that the new phones make it easy to create augmented reality apps, like this game where virtual pigeons suddenly appear in a London office.
The technology before would have taken years to create and hundreds of people in a team. Now small studios like me of 4 people can suddenly create games in just a couple of months.
Unlocking it is as easy as looking at it.
Back in California, not everything was going smoothly with the facial recognition system.
Ho, ho, ho. Let's go to backup here.
But Apple will be hoping that this, its most expensive phone yet, will prove it hasn't lost the knack of delighting consumers.
That report from the BBC about Apple's flash new phone. Let's return now to our Savemart story just before we go tonight. Concerns from staff members who work in the stores that they're not provided with gloves when sorting items that are collected from the Blue Cancer Foundation clothing bins. Now, we should say that these are not run by the Cancer Foundation. They are, in fact, run by Savemart. Over the past 2 nights, workers have described sorting through hazardous items, including kitchen rubbish, soiled nappies, broken glass, dead animals and unwashed clothing with faeces and blood on them. Workers from throughout the country have contacted us and told us the company refuses to provide gloves or allow staff to bring their own. Now, WorkSafe New Zealand told us tonight it will send an investigator to the Newlands Savemart. That was on checkpoint at about 5:15. Savemart's owner, Tom Doonan, has refused to be interviewed. He told us many of the Newlands staff have worked there for years and love their jobs, and we should speak to them about that. We'd love to be able to go there and do that. We'd love to be able to go and film where they work and talk to them as they work. We've asked to visit tomorrow. We're yet to hear back. Mr. Doonan's also clarified how much he's donated to the Child Cancer Foundation. He says $3.5 million over the past 19 years since Doolan's rags became Savemart have gone to the Child Cancer Foundation. Remember, it's their name on the blue bins. So $3.5 million over the past 19 years has gone to the Child Cancer Foundation. We'll have more on this tomorrow. Thank you for being with us. That is Checkpoint for this evening. On behalf of our excellent team, a very good evening indeed.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The National MP, Jian Yang, has confirmed that he taught English to spies in China, but denies that he's a spy himself. Nationals leader Bill English says the party is not carrying out a smear campaign on Labour's tax plans, merely asking the questions the public needs answers to. Waikato DHB says it's sorry and will look into the incident after Labour leader Jacinda Ardern said her 85-year-old grandfather was pressured to leave hospital late at night. The couple who died after their car plunged into a Christchurch lake were Shatil and Avneil Ram. And Dame Kiri Takanawa has announced her retirement, saying she'll never sing in public again. Our next news and weather is at 7.
RNZ National on Saturday night plays your favourite songs.
I got rhythm, I got music, I got my man. Who could ask for anything more? Drums!
Plus this week in Late Night Thrill, we celebrate the birthday of John